The gym at Emerson Community Center in Wilmington, North Carolina, had seen better decades. The backboard on the north end had a hairline crack nobody had gotten around to fixing. The bleachers groaned whenever someone sat on the outer edge. The floor itself was always clean, but carried the particular weariness of a surface that had absorbed 40 years of sneaker squeaks and fallen bodies and the dreams of children who had nowhere else to bring them. It survived because certain people refused to let it do otherwise. Michael Jordan had not planned to stop here. He had been in Wilmington for 2 days on business and had found himself driving routes from his childhood with no particular destination, the way people do when a place they grew up in starts to feel more like memory than geography. He had not intended to end up on Caldwell Street, but here he was, and there was Emerson Community Center, and the parking lot was empty at 7 in the morning, except for a single rusted Honda Civic, and something about that made him slow down and eventually stop. The front door was unlocked. He pushed through and stepped into the lobby, which smelled of floor cleaner and old wood, and something faintly metallic that he associated with gymnasiums specifically, a smell that lived nowhere else and meant nothing else. He heard something before he saw anything. A soft, rhythmic sound coming from beyond the double doors that led to the main gym. He pushed through them quietly. The gym was empty, except for one person. An old man was sitting on the bottom bleacher against the far wall. His back curved gently forward. His chin dropped toward his chest, his hands resting open in his lap. He wore grey work pants and a blue janitor's shirt with the Emerson name stitched above the pocket. Beside him a mop handle leaned at an angle against the bleacher, and on the floor sat a yellow bucket with the mop head resting in it. The man was asleep. His breathing was slow and even, and he looked deeply, completely exhausted, the kind of exhausted that doesn't come from one bad night, but from years of accumulation. Michael stood in the doorway and did not move. He looked at the mop. He looked at the immaculate floor stretching between them, gleaming faintly in the morning light through the high windows. He looked at the old man's hands, large and calloused, resting in his lap with the stillness of hands that had worked very hard for a very long time, and had, for just this moment, stopped. He recognized him. It took a moment to be sure because the man was older than Michael's memory of him by at least 15 years, and memory tends to freeze people at the age you knew them. But the shape of the face was the same, the broad forehead, the particular angle of the jaw. Michael walked slowly across the gym floor and stopped 10 feet away, and was certain. His name was Earl Patton. He had been the janitor at Emerson Community Center for as long as Michael could remember coming here as a boy. He had seemed old even then, which was its own kind of measurement. He had been the man who unlocked the gym on Saturday mornings before anyone arrived, and let Michael and his friends play for hours without charging the drop-in fee because he knew their families couldn't always afford it. He had been the man who fixed the broken drinking fountain twice with his own tools before the maintenance budget could cover it. He had been the man who, on a specific afternoon in the summer of Michael's 13th year, had found Michael sitting alone on this exact bleacher after a coach at a showcase had told him he was too slight, too inconsistent, too unlikely to amount to anything serious. Earl Patton had sat down beside him without being asked, and said nothing for a while, and then said, "Son, the people who tell you what you can't do are just describing the limits of their own imagination. Don't live inside somebody else's imagination." Michael had never forgotten that sentence. He had carried it through every cut, every doubt, every moment when the ceiling seemed fixed and final. He had never returned to tell Earl Patton what those words had done, partly because fame moves people through the world in ways that make returning to ordinary rooms feel complicated, and partly because he had simply assumed, the way people assume things about figures from their past, that Earl was fine, retired somewhere warm and taken care of. He was not fine. He was here asleep on a bleacher with his mop beside him, so tired he had fallen asleep mid-shift. Michael sat down quietly a few feet away and waited. Earl woke gradually, eyes opening slowly, the room reassembling itself in stages. He straightened and looked at his hands, and then looked up and turned his head and saw Michael Jordan sitting 3 feet away. He stared. He blinked twice. He said in a voice roughened by age and early mornings, "Either I'm still asleep or something very strange is happening." Michael smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Patton." Something in Earl's face shifted then. the careful blankness giving way to recognition, and then to a quiet, complex warmth. He said, "Michael." Just the name, as if it were sufficient and complete. They shook hands. Earl's grip was still strong. His hand was cold and rough in the way of hands that have spent decades in contact with hard surfaces and cleaning chemicals. Michael asked how he was, and Earl said he was fine, just resting a moment, had been here since 4:30, and the body sometimes makes its own decisions about rest regardless of what the schedule requires. He said it with a slight embarrassment and reached for his mop handle as if to demonstrate he was already returning to work. Michael put his hand gently on Earl's arm and said there was no rush. Earl settled back and said he supposed the floor would still need mopping in 10 minutes as much as it did right now. They talked. Michael asked about Earl's life, and Earl answered with the brevity of someone accustomed to not taking up too much space in a conversation. He was 79 years old. He had worked at Emerson for 42 years. He was still working full-time because his pension was not enough to cover expenses, particularly since his wife Dorothy had developed a heart condition 3 years ago, requiring medication that cost more than either of them had anticipated, when the future had still seemed manageable. His daughter was in Memphis and his son in Seattle, and they helped when they could, but it wasn't enough to allow Earl to stop working, so he had not stopped. He said all of this without bitterness. That was what struck Michael most, the absence of resentment, no self-pity, no performance of suffering. Earl described his situation the way a person describes weather, as a condition to be navigated rather than a grievance to be aired. He had always been that way. Michael remembered it now clearly, that quality of deep and seasoned peace that was not defeat, but something harder and more honest than defeat. Michael asked about Dorothy. Earl's face softened in a way that 42 years of marriage had not diminished. He said she was home, said the house had stairs that were difficult for her now, and they had been meaning to address that, but things like that cost money. He said she still packed his lunch every day in a blue container and left it by the door, and that he thought about that blue container on hard mornings as a reason to keep going. Michael listened without interrupting. He looked at the gym around them, the cracked backboard, the groaning bleachers, the floor that gleamed because this man had been here since 4:30. He thought about a sentence carried for 50 years. He thought about a boy on this bleacher being told not to live inside somebody else's imagination. He thought about everything that sentence had unlocked. Before he left that morning, Michael shook Earl's hand and said he was glad he had stopped. Earl said he was glad too, simply and without any sense of what was coming. Michael walked back across the floor of his childhood and went out to his car and sat in the parking lot for a long time before starting the engine. He made the first call before he left that parking lot. He spent the following 2 days making quiet arrangements. He spoke with the community center's administrator, a tired woman named Carol who had been underfunded for so long she had forgotten what adequately funded felt like, asking careful questions about the building's needs. He brought in a contractor who walked the facility and produced a list of necessary repairs that was long but not impossible. He spoke with a financial advisor about supplementing the pension of a long-time employee facing ongoing medical costs. He spoke with a doctor he trusted about Dorothy's condition and what proper resources would mean for her quality of life. He did all of this without announcing it and asked everyone involved to say nothing yet. On the 4th morning, Michael went back to the gym. Earl was there at 5, mopping the main floor in slow, methodical passes, and he looked up when Michael came through the doors and said, "You're back." Michael said he couldn't stay away. He sat on the bleacher, and after a while said he wanted to tell Earl something he should have said a long time ago. He told him about the sentence. He said it clearly and completely, the specific afternoon, the specific words, the way he had carried them through every moment when someone else's limitations had tried to become his own. He said that sentence had been with him in practice when he was exhausted, and in games when he was uncertain, and in every year after basketball when he had been building something new and hadn't been sure it would hold. He said he had never come back to say thank you, and that was a failure he intended to correct. Earl had stopped mopping. He stood in the middle of the floor holding the handle and looking at Michael, and then he said something Michael hadn't expected. He said he didn't remember saying that. He meant it genuinely, not as modesty. He said he had sat with a lot of children on those bleachers and said whatever seemed true at the time. Michael said that was exactly the point. After a moment, Earl asked what he meant. Michael said that the most important things people do for each other are usually the things they do without keeping score, without remembering, without any expectation of return. That Earl had changed the course of a life with a sentence he hadn't even stored in his memory. That this was not a small thing, that this was in fact the whole thing. Earl sat down on the bleacher. He put the mop across his knees and looked at the floor, and Michael gave him the silence because some things need silence before they can be received. Then Michael told him what he had arranged. He said the house would be assessed that week, and every modification needed to make it accessible for Dorothy would be completed at no cost to them. He said he had established a fund that would supplement Earl's pension enough that he could retire immediately if he chose to, and that Dorothy's medical costs would be covered going forward. He said the community center would be receiving a donation covering all necessary repairs, including the backboard, the bleachers, and the drinking fountain that Earl had fixed twice with his own tools and his own time. Earl was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up and asked simply, "Why?" Michael said, "Because 42 years of showing up deserves to be met. Because a sentence said to a child on a bleacher matters even when the person who said it doesn't remember saying it. Because the people who hold places like this, together with their quiet consistency, deserve more than they are usually given. And he was in a position to give more, so he was going to." Earl looked at him steadily. He said Dorothy was going to think he was making it up when he told her. Michael said he would come and tell her himself. Earl smiled then, the full version of it, and said she would like that very much. She had watched every game he ever played on a television in a living room she kept immaculately clean. They walked out to the parking lot together, Earl moving slowly, Michael matching his pace without making a point of it. At the rusted Honda Civic, Earl stopped and turned and shook Michael's hand one last time. He said he didn't have words. Michael said he didn't need them. Earl nodded and got in his car and drove away, and Michael stood alone in the empty parking lot, watching until the car was gone. He stayed there a while in the quiet morning, in the same parking lot where he had locked his bicycle as a boy, outside the building where a man he barely knew had handed him a sentence that had built a life. The air was warming around him. Inside, the gym floor waited, clean and ready, the way it always was, the way it had always been, because one man had come every morning for 42 years and made sure of it. Michael got in his car. He had a great deal to take care of. He was already looking forward to all of it.